Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video. This time it's another favorite artist video. For this one, I'm highlighting Al Feldstein and Steve Ditko. So I'm going to start off with Feldstein. From what I heard about Al Feldstein, he was kind of, I guess, crusty, you know. But I've always been a big fan of his work. Those that know Al Feldstein, who he was, he passed away. I think in the last few years he passed away. He was one of the last surviving EC artists, and I've always been a big fan of his work ever since I've uh, had Tales from the Crypt comics or reprints in my collection. I was able to see some of his work. He's done other books with EC, such as Weird Science, Weird Fantasy, and things like that. I was never a big fan of the science fiction books. Maybe one day I'll start collecting them, but he's done a lot of different things. So I just pulled out a few books that I have. I mean, I have a few Al Feldstein books. I don't have a whole lot. I pulled out a couple that I think are really cool that are in my collection to show off. I'll start off with the Haunt of Fear. Now, he's done quite a few Haunt of Fears before Graham Ingalls became the head artist on that series. So the only one from Haunt of Fear that I'm going to show you is Haunt of Fear number 10. Here we have, I think this is a classic cover, with the bull, the dead bull running after the matador and the dead matador holding this guy in place. What I've always liked about Feldstein, I can always tell whenever you see a Feldstein book, every artist has their own unique style. Feldstein is no exception to that. I've always noticed around the eyes, there's something with Feldstein's work that you could just tell is Feldstein. Something very distinctive, sort of like Johnny Craig. All his characters are very handsome. The men are, square-jawed, almost like superhero type guys. And Grant Ingalls, you always have those characters where they're kind of ugly and there's always like drool in their mouths when their mouths are wide open. Everybody has a distinct style. Shock Suspense Stories number 1. I was very happy to get this book. My previous copy was, this one right here is probably a 4.0, but the one I had was really low and I was able to sell it off and get this one over a year and a half ago. Now here's another one that I think is really, really cool by Feldstein. Tales from the Crypt number 21. One of my favorite covers. And I think, like I've said in a previous video, I think that number 21 sometimes gets lost between 20 and 22. 20 being the very first Tales from the Crypt book, and 22 being the first with the Tales from the Crypt logo, the one that's been used throughout the decades on the HBO TV series and throughout the rest of the series. This one's sort of, I think it's obviously sandwiched between them, but it sort of gets lost in the shuffle, in my opinion. But a great cover. And here's a classic one by Feldstein from Tales from the Crypt. I don't want to say infamous, but definitely one of the more famous books famous covers from his run on Tales from the Crypt. The Big Book cover. This, along with Crypt Terror 18, that's not a Feldstein cover, but it has Feldstein stories in it, Maestro's Hand, and I don't know if that's the only one. I gotta look at it again. But you remember the Big Book. A lot of EC fans remember the Big Book that came out in the 70s. It was a reprint, hardcover reprint. It said horror comics from the 1950s. And they used Tales from the Crypt number 23 as its cover. I don't have the Big Book. I don't know. It's something that eventually I feel I should add to my collection since I'm an EC fan. But honestly, I'm not that impressed with what's inside it. Not when it comes to art, but some of the stories, they're good, obviously. But, I would have put different stories in that collection of EC horror stories. So that's why I've been hesitant with the big book, because I'm not overly impressed with the selection. But whatever, right? Who cares what I think? So that's Al Feldstein. Like I said, he recently passed away within the last few years. Definitely one of my favorite EC artists. There are a lot of EC artists that I like Johnny Craig and Graham Ingalls and Wally Wood. I like Wally Wood, but I'm not a big fan. I'm not that big of a fan of Wally Wood. I know he's got a very, very strong fan base, but his artwork to me is good, but it's never been anything that's so good, in my opinion. But that's it for Al Feldstein. Now, I'm going to go, for those of you that don't really know too much about Al Feldstein, I'm sure you've heard of my next artist, Steve Ditko. Now, Steve Ditko was, he recently passed away. He passed away a couple years ago. He passed away the same year Stan Lee passed away. I think they died within 5 or 6 months of each other. I think Stan Lee died either in November or December. I think December. I don't know. I don't remember. But, those two were responsible for creating SpiderMan. And those that know the story between Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, there was a little bit of bad blood between the two. I've heard stories that it went over who was going to be the real Green Goblin, who was going to be the Green Goblin, his secret identity over that. I don't know how true that is. But I know, but a lot of the heat, I think, between them in later years came over the fact who was the creator of Spider-Man. Steve Ditko felt he was co-creator. And I think Stan Lee, although he acknowledged that Steve Ditko was the co-creator, I think there was some hesitance in his voice whenever he was asked the question, do you consider Steve Ditko a co-creator of Spider-Man? I think even though he said yes, I think there was some, he hesitated a bit. But you could check that out. There are documentaries on that. But there were some issues between the two. Now, Steve Ditko not only helped co-create Spider-Man, he helped co-create Doctor Strange. Now, I don't have too much Doctor Strange in my collection other than his first appearance. But, and that's not a book I'm showing off in this video. I'm going to stick with Spider-Man. But Steve Ditko did some work after Spider-Man. He created Mr. A, and we all know about that, those type of characters and so forth. But he was a very interesting person. He had a very strict political belief, and he followed it through to the end of days. He saw things in black and white. And I remember seeing this. I'll show you some of the books while I talk. Amazing Spider-Man 3. I'm just going to show some of his books. I'm not going to show every single Spider-Man issue I have. One of my favorites, though, by Ditko. The first appearance of Dr. Octopus, but also such a great cover. I've always loved this cover, always enamored with this cover. Dr. Octopus was always, there was always a creepiness to him that I thought Ditko really did a good job with. But anyway, he drew a lot of, funky things with Doctor Strange. And I remember that documentary, a lot of people back in the 60s when they saw, this is a great cover, First Lizard, Amazing Spider-Man 6, a lot of people saw his drawings and figured that this guy was on acid, he was part of the hippie movement and all that, but nothing could be farther from the truth when it comes to Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko, from what I understand, was an ultra-conservative in his lifestyle and his political beliefs right to his dying day. Like I said earlier, he saw things in black and white. There was no gray. And he adhered to Ayn Rand and her beliefs and all her philosophy. So you got to give him credit for somebody that really stuck with that throughout his whole life. Even when losing chances for money, he didn't care. One of my favorite Ditko covers in the Spider-Man run, Amazing Spider-Man #9. Love it. I've always loved Electro. I wasn't a big fan of the Jamie Foxx portrayal of Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2. That will be in one of my From the Page to the Screen videos, but I don't know what the hell went on with that one. But whatever. Here we have Dr. Octopus again. I love this cover. I've always loved this cover. And it was a real treat to finally add this to my collection a couple of years ago, because I remember seeing this cover when I first started collecting. I was like, oh wow, this looks really cool. He's on a ship and all that stuff. I just thought it was pretty cool, and it was nice to finally add it to my collection. Love it. Here's another one. Well, I'm only going to go over two more. I'm not going to go over every single Ditko cover. And, and the thing is, I think Steve Ditko, he did a lot of good covers, great covers, if you will, for Spider-Man. And then there were a few, and I could say the same thing for Jack Kirby. Then there were a few that were just like, I would love to show Amazing Spider-Man 14, but I just don't think it's a particularly good cover compared to the ones I picked out here right now. Amazing Spider-Man 13, first appearance of Mysterio. I've always loved Mysterio, and I love the fact that in the movie, Far From Home, they pretty much used Ditko's design. There were some alterations to it, of course, to his character and the design of his suit, but it was pretty much the same. And you would figure that when they translate from the page to the screen, the Mysterio character, they would change him up quite a bit to make him, a little less, I guess, silly looking, but they used that design almost flawlessly, and it worked. It worked wonderfully, I thought. Maybe some of you didn't. And one of my favorite ones, towards the end. Now, I don't have every Ditko cover. There are a lot of great ones that I don't have, like number 33. But one of the best ones, I think, and it's very simple, towards the end of Ditko's run, reasonably close to the end of Ditko's run on Spider-Man, is Amazing Spider-Man 28. The first appearance of the Molten Man. The Molten Man I don't think is really any big deal, but this cover is wonderful. Just look the way, it's like I said, it's simple. There's no background. It's just all black. But just look the way the Molten Man is drawn, and the Spider-Man, the design on his outfit. A really great book, and a very, very difficult book to get in a decent grade because of the black cover. Whenever there are flaws on the comic, in particular on the spine, with black covers, you see them, and it really takes away from the niceness of the cover. But this copy is not bad. What is this, a 5.0? Yeah. I got this maybe 4 years ago. I was lucky to get this and another book, another Spider-Man book for what I thought was a decent price. So that's it. So what do you think about Al Feldstein? For those of you that even know who Al Feldstein is. But what do you think about Steve Ditko? What were some of your favorite covers in the Amazing Spider-Man run from Ditko? What were some of your favorite books from Ditko that maybe some people don't even know about, pre-Marvel? Like books from the books like The Thing. How about those from the 1950s? Those are some real good ones too. Another little fact about Steve Ditko. He trained under what was his name? Jerry Robinson. And we all know who Jerry Robinson is, right? When it comes to Batman, he was one of the co-creators of the Joker. And there's another one of those stories, like I was talking about earlier with Steve Ditko and Stan Lee. There's sort of a little bit of bad blood. Who created Spider-Man? Who should get all the credit for Spider-Man? All that stuff. Well, we all know Jerry Robinson had his issues with Bob Kane. Who created the Joker? Oh, I created the Joker. No, I created the Joker. No, I said this. It's all interesting to read this sort of stuff in comic book lore. There's a lot more to these characters than what we see on the big screen. There's a lot more to these characters than what we see in the comics. Sometimes behind the scenes, it's just as entertaining as what's on that page. Take care, everyone.